the 52nd edition of the Dallas Housing Coalition's Housing for All webinar series. I'm Austin Holmes, your host and a Senior Development Associate at Dominion and a member of the Dallas Housing Coalition's Steering Committee. We are continuing to interview our Dallas Zoning 101 Community Talk facilitators. Last week, we interviewed Jennifer Rangel, co-founder of Rio Planning. This week, we are joined by Brandon Blanker, who will be leading community talks in North Dallas, East Dallas, Casa Linda, and Casa View, Uptown, Downtown, and Oaklawn, and for a virtual audience. Brandon is a recognized leader in downtown revitalization, mixed-use development, public engagement, and place-based economic development. He has nearly 20 years of experience in real estate from New York to Texas. In total, he has played a key role in entitling over 15 million square feet of mixed-use development, representing over $12 billion in development potential. Through it all, Brandon is a strong believer in the triple bottom line of social, environmental, and economic responsibility. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited about this. And as a resident of one of those places, I happen to live in the Arts District in downtown and had lived in Uptown. It's great to help educate fellow members and engage with fellow members of my community.
Yeah. Quick moment of technical difficulty on my sound there. Sorry about that. But let's get into our conversation. So,
sure.
You've worn many hats in the planning and community development spaces. So, how do you define your work today at 3BL Strategies, and what motivates your approach to shaping communities?
Sure. So, I got into this business in terms of real estate development and downtown revitalization, actually through volunteer work. It's more than 20 years at this point, about 25 years ago, in a small town, a small city called Glen Cove, New York on Long Island. Long Island, the birthplace of the modern suburb and the birthplace of NIMBYism. And here was presented, and I was, on the board of the Chamber of Commerce, and we had a developer for a large-scale mixed-use development. I was in my late 20s and thought, who could possibly say no? And this was a right-sized development where you had an opportunity on a former brownfield to build literally 1,000 residential units and transit-oriented development with a ferry to Manhattan and local retail. It was adjacent to the downtown, and I thought that this is just wonderful. What I quickly learned is that there was a lot of fear, and a lot of that were legitimate concerns, and a lot of it, I don't want to say they were illegitimate, but based on misconceptions or just a fear of change. I very quickly realized that the best way, and this development is now up, and it's something that the city loves, and it's done wonderful things back in my hometown. But I learned that you need to have mindful and meaningful community engagement. And that's where I sort of connected my former career in marketing and public affairs with understanding the nuts and bolts of how do you plan and build these types of communities. I think community really is the key word there. And that's resulted in 3BL Strategies and development. And 3BL stands for the triple bottom line. I'm a firm believer in social, environmental, and economic responsibility. And to not grow, to not do anything, rarely results in those outcomes. But you have to balance what is good for the community, engaging the community, and as I'll describe later, a co-creative process in order to get there. It's not easy, but with intention and focus and a lot of hard work, you can do a lot of good things.
That's really a great background, and really helps me contextualize and understand kind of how you've gotten to where you are today. And I love 3BL. I love the triple bottom line. I had a mentor who he had a double bottom line, and his thing was, you want to do well financially while doing good in the community. And so I really resonate with that, and the work that I try to do in affordable housing has some similar echoes.
And if I can add to that, when you talk about economic responsibility, and not to go into a theory of economics here, but we are in at least somewhat of a free market economy.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is the economics have to work for a community, whether it's tax, ratables and more revenue, new jobs, higher paying jobs. But the reality is, if you're not able to provide an opportunity for local investors to make money, for local businesses, and for developers, small and large alike, depending on the type of project and what the community desires, you're not going to find those outcomes, right? So economic responsibility comes on both sides, of the ledger. It's for the community, but it's also for those who are involved in helping to build the community.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I love, any situation that improves a community is good. But what I really love is whenever it is something that is scalable and sustainable, and you really need to have something that is economically viable on all sides for that to be scalable and sustainable, because otherwise it won't be repeated. So
no, absolutely. And I struggle sometimes with how we've built so much of our country, because we build disposable communities. I mean, we literally build, whether it's retail or whether it's, apartments and even homes, for ownership, that are literally designed to not last more than 20, 30, 40 years, right? And the places that we love, whether it's the cities here or when folks go to Europe and they say, I didn't have to get in my car for 2 weeks. I mean, we're talking about buildings that are hundreds of years old. And I think that that's something that we've gotten away from. And, the reality is our land use and building regulations, and it's why people are afraid of growth, because what we do plan and build affects a community for 1, 2, or 3 generations. And when we're building something, that's almost designed not to last from the start, and we're not taking into consideration people when we're building, for example, for the car and the automobile, and not to create places that allow people to thrive, we're setting ourselves back. And land use and zoning has such an effect on our lives, our livelihood, our health, our wellness. It's well beyond just economics.
It definitely is. And, I like, that's one of the reasons why, I really am interested in real estate and land use, because you can go back throughout history and understand a lot of things about different times that are then, trickling into our modern day times based on, what decisions were made then and then how that impacts now. And, I love that you mentioned, going to Europe and not driving a car for a little while, and then you kind of come back here and feel the difference. And even in the United States, even if you look at cities that, a big thing that I like to look at is when a city really urbanized and really, got larger and grew, and what was that time, that the massive growth of the city, was it before or after the creation of the car and everything like that? And so it's really interesting to see, how different cities, even within the United States, are laid out based off of what was happening at the time whenever they were undergoing their massive growth phase.
And even throughout, the Metroplex and throughout Dallas, right? And it's not just about your big core downtown.
Yeah.
I moved here about 10 years ago, and, what was at the time uptown and downtown was just going, is now literally a series of 6 evolving neighborhoods that are interconnected. And, having grown up in a different region, and New York, was my city, for so long, to me, what makes a city are those different neighborhoods that they're connected and they make up a greater whole, but they have something unto themselves, so whether it's Uptown and State Thomas, where you can then walk to Victory Park, through the Arts District to West End, with Carpenter Park, even to Deep Ellum, it's great to see that evolve. But I also want to be clear that I'm not anti-car, right? It's about balance, and it's about choice. And even in your neighborhoods that might be more auto dependent, where can you provide nodes of walkability and bikeability, create that option, create safety? And then in your more urban walkable areas, whether it's downtown Dallas or a downtown McKinney or a Roanoke, smaller scale, more historic downtowns, how can you accommodate the car and then create this place for people?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a lot about balance, and it's a lot about getting that engagement, so you actually know what folks want. Really cool, really cool. So you've been involved with, Urban Land Institute as well as Congress for New Urbanism for quite a while. They're 2 groups with strong visions of how we build cities. In your own words, what core ideals do these organizations stand for, and how do they shape the way that you think about growth and development?
Sure. At root, it's about responsible development.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean we all have the exact same idea of what is responsible
Yeah.
development. But again, I keep coming back to that word. What are the positive outcomes? And it goes back to the social, environmental, and economic. And Urban Land Institute, more or less, not exclusively, but more or less, involves the larger players in the industry, more institutional development, your municipal players. Congress of the New Urbanism, on the other hand, focuses, again, not exclusively, but more on neighborhood scale development. And, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I got into this industry, ULI hadn't yet embraced or really knew much about walkable urban development and that type of mixed use, building these places for people, because the market hadn't yet re-evolved for that. CNU was created about 30, 35 years ago, Congress of the New Urbanism, to help educate the world as to how can we create these traditional neighborhoods. What I've seen, and hopefully I've played a small role in this, are the larger players have recognized the benefits and also how to create these neighborhood scale and how to do the larger projects so that they have that human intention and are places that people want to spend time in. Likewise, how can the players, the residential or mixed-use developers at a neighborhood scale, your incremental developers, learn from the larger players and have access to some of their tools and strategies. So, it comes down to that balance and choice, the big, the small, creating those places for people. And I'm proud to have played a role with both organizations.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the community engagement, both the talks coming up and really just, community engagement's at the heart of really what you do and everything you do. And so it's often, and I find it's often difficult to navigate because often audiences bring different perspectives, often clashing ones. So whether you're in North Dallas, East Dallas, Uptown, Casa Linda, or Casa View, how do you approach engaging with these groups who may not agree on development, while still building trust and just moving these conversations forward so you can actually get something done for the community?
Sure. So the first thing I'd say is let's not focus on the development. That's a means to an end. Let's not focus on the zoning, and I'll explain what I mean by this, because both are very, very important and impactful. Because zoning is a means to an end, right? Your zoning and land use regulations will guide and dictate what type of development. But at the end of the day, the type of development you do will result in those outcomes. So let's focus on those outcomes. What do you want to see in your community? Do you need more attainable and affordable housing? Do you need more, quality market rate housing? Do you need more local businesses? Do you need more mobility options? And different communities, have a different taste and a different flavor of what they would like to see. But they also have a responsibility, right? We as communities aren't insular. What we do has an effect on our neighbors and our region. And that's sort of the balance of, that's the balance of society, right? Yes, we all should have as much choice and freedom to do what we want to do, but what we choose also impacts others, and we have to take that into consideration. So with that, what I'd say is don't overly focus on the plan, on what is going to be built. Rather, focus on those outcomes and then find a way where the municipality, where your development community, whether it's one large developer for a big project or smaller landowners, how can they work with the community in a co-creative process? Start at the end. What are those outcomes we want to see? And how do we have to build? What do we have to build in order to get there? And what you do through that process is, communities and people, they're a lot more intelligent than the experts sometimes, give them credit for. But they also aren't ingrained on a day-to-day basis as we are, who are in land use. So if you provide them the understanding that if you want more job creation, if you want more walkability or a public square or the bike shop, if you want the organic grocer, if you happen to live in a food desert and you need to have a grocer and fresh produce, you may need to accept certain types of development that if you just focus on the buildings themselves, might not happen. That might mean some greater density or diversity of housing choices. In some communities, it might mean more rental. In some communities, it may necessitate finding ways for more ownership. Again, start at the vision and the ideal, work backwards and co-create that. And that's how I got into this business. Before I became a developer, I was in public affairs and community engagement. I'm not here to promote anything, but I'm about to relaunch something that's dear to me, which is a co-creative placemaking tool that allows community members to upload the ideas, stores, shops, amenities, jobs programs that they would like to see incorporated into a municipal comprehensive plan or into a development. And that provides that opportunity for them to be engaged, to get feedback loops and understand legitimately what are the possibilities, what are the economic realities, and then a community and those they elect to govern them can make educated choices. And that's what this is about. It's engaging people so they learn and can make educated choices about the future of their neighborhood.
That's amazing. That's really great. And I really like how you put that with, starting with the vision rather than the development itself, rather than the building itself. And whenever you do start with a vision, like you said, there still can be clashes in that vision, but you can kind of weave together a story and then, help take from both sides and find those compromises needed and explain the nuances of, well, if you want this, that's got to come with this and everything like that.
It was a separate matter. It was, I was speaking with a congressman. This is going back, 20 years ago, and it didn't relate to land use. They were talking about how, the squabbles that they would have, in DC, right? And in Congress, they said, look, we agree on 85% of the things, and even in today's divisive environment, we agree on 85%, and we spend 90% of the time talking about the other 15%. Well, the same goes with land use. We all want much of the same outcome. Let's focus on that. And by creating community, creating an opportunity to break down the silos, we drive in our cars and we go to school or to church or to synagogue or to soccer practice, and we sort of choose the same group of people in these little bubbles that we speak with. And I think we need to find a way to get out of that. And good community engagement allows that to happen, allows you to find that common ground and break down those barriers.
It really does. I feel like you're coming at it a really courageous way and productive way. So that's awesome. That's awesome. So, sometimes we, as Dallas residents, naturally experience a fear of change or even, hold different biases. How do you plan to balance presenting the facts, sharing your professional opinion, and encourage communities to engage constructively, specifically with your zoning 101 talks? So how can really the fear aspect of that, how do you kind of overcome that?
Well, first, I'm there to educate and engage, right? Because part of educating, there's a part where you do have to, lay out certain facts and underlying realities, but I'm not there to talk to people. I'm there to engage with them in a back and forth. So it's education, first of all, right? So individuals can make informed decisions, as we just talked about. Now, that doesn't mean I don't have opinions on things. And I hope I've been doing this for 25 years. I hope they are informed opinions, but they are still opinions. And I don't think it's misleading for me to share those opinions. I just need to be honest and say, look, there's zoning reform going on. There's things that's happened at the state level. There are good consequences. There are consequences that I might prefer that some folks in this audience may or may not. And then you have unintended consequences. So as I educate, I think we need to be truthful and honest about how we got here, about the history and the realities of why zoning was invented, what it is. And what it is just an objective. This is what zoning is. This is what it does, how it affects your communities, but also have sometimes difficult conversations of, the elements that went into and the inequitable outcomes that are a result of how we have decided to build our communities, which goes back to zoning. A lot of that is fact that we can't argue with, but some of that's also opinion. And I just need to be honest with that, and put that out there. I think most of all, it goes back to that opportunity to engage. Again, what's our outcome? Our outcome isn't just to have a bunch of people that understand zoning better. It's so they understand what zoning is, have a better idea of the processes that are going on that will affect their communities, in my opinion, I think in a lot of very positive ways. But regardless if someone is for or against certain elements of the reforms, well, let them be engaged. Let them be informed. how can they have their voice heard? How can they become involved in the process? You
Hmm.
create that involved citizenry, I think you're
Yeah.
going to end up with better and more balanced outcomes.
Fully agree. And I think I would love if you talked about it a little bit more. You touched on the co-collaboration
Yeah.
aspect of what you do. I find that so important too, because a lot of times, folks see something getting built and maybe they wouldn't have been against it, but it's like, well, where'd this come from?
Yeah.
I think a lot of times just the fact that people have the opportunity to engage, and hopefully after these talks, they'll have the confidence and ability to actually do that engagement. I think that is sometimes so impactful in shaping an outcome that people feel good about too. Just by being involved, just by having a seat at the table and feeling as though they put their 2 cents in. I think that definitely leads to not only just better outcomes that are more attuned to the community, but also a community itself that accepts the development with open arms more so because they've felt a part of the process throughout. Is that kind of
That,
what you mean on the co-collaboration part?
100%, and not only just a part of the process. This isn't just, giving lip service. It's
Hmm.
real engagement. It's real positive feedback. It's telling
Yeah.
a community that, you want these 12 things. Well, you might need 3 stories or 5 stories in this community to get those outcomes. I'm not
Yeah.
telling you have to have that type of building, but you
Hmm.
can't have the outcomes you want and a parking lot or 1 story.
Mm.
Then the community can decide and say, okay, at first we were afraid of, again, whether it's height or density or a mix of uses or
Yeah.
apartments or whatever it might be. But when they really learn the underlying facts, they can say, I'm much more comfortable with it. I understand how we got there. And sometimes we all do this. Sometimes they'll say, look, I would prefer not to have everything that the developer
Yeah.
or city says, but I realize that it's 90% good. Right.
Yeah.
And we do that in everyday life where we don't get the perfect. Don't let perfect be the enemy of excellence. And we have
Mm.
an opportunity to create better communities by doing this.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, that's key. So after the talks that you're hosting, the Dallas Housing Coalition will be hosting an inaugural resident housing summit Saturday, November the 22nd. Hopefully, bringing many of the community talk attendees from across the city together with your peer facilitators, Dee Powell and Jennifer Rang. How would you like to see these attendees apply what they learned at your talks, at the Zoning 101 talks, to the resident housing summit and beyond? What sort of conversations are you hoping are spurred there?
Yeah, engage, right? That's first of all is,
Hmm.
when they are hopefully more informed, then go back and do some of their own research, come and that's their chance to provide their opinions,
Yeah.
to maybe get a little bit more detail and to have more of a conversation. I want to elicit as much of a conversation during the 101s as possible, but to some degree, there's a classroom format, as you're educating.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we will have that more engaged and involved citizenry come back and start to talk about how they can have a better imprint on the future of their communities, and also give us feedback. How can
Yeah.
we do better in the future? I've been doing this for 20, 25 years, but at every meeting, I learned something I could do a little bit better. So hopefully that's also a feedback loop for us, as the facilitators of how might we be able to do an even better job moving forward, and how can we learn from the very residents that we are trying to, teach and inform.
That's really cool. I like think about it that way. Zoning 101, you're going to the classroom, you're learning, you're getting all that knowledge up, and then you come to the resident summit and you're able to have that conversation and share, well, these are my concerns. I live in this part of the city and this is what we're dealing with, and have that interaction, that feedback, so that we can all work together to build beautiful things that
Yeah.
that people are really proud of. I'm just curious, in terms of your experience. Of course, you've had years and years of experience. You've had tons of these conversations. What trends would you say you've identified in terms of, as you're doing this outreach, as you're having these conversations with different people in different parts of the country? What trends have you noticed over the years in terms of people wanting to learn more about, or common concerns that people are having, or common misconceptions that people have? What sort of things are you picking up that are
Sure.
happening in
I,
the
I think
discussion?
that there's When I started this 20, 25 years ago and quickly learned the benefits of what we call walkable urbanism or downtown revitalization, mixed use development, however you want to talk about it, it was a very small group, right?
Mm.
And I'm proud to, like I say, I've played a very small role in helping to educate in my former home, in my decade now here in Dallas and the Metroplex. And I've seen that there's a much greater understanding of those benefits. And what we've seen is in traditionally, say, suburban auto-only communities, you see a focus on creating more of a downtown core, where, again, it goes back to that word of balance. How can you have your bucolic single-family home neighborhoods, right, where there is that sort of type of feel and an environment that a lot of people, most of the market wants. But it's great when you can walk 10 minutes or at least drive 5 or 7 minutes and get to a downtown. And you see this in a number of communities. So I live in the big city, right? I'm in the Arts District. I live in a 40-story tower, but I used to live in a small village, that was a suburb and that had this little main street downtown. And I think people are recognizing that, urbanism, people hear the word urban, but that's a range. And it can be a rural main street. It can have a small downtown that's an ex-urban downtown. It can be, as I had mentioned, McKinney and that sort of public square, or it could be downtown Fort Worth, right? You have that full array. And I think people are becoming more comfortable with that if it's presented in the right way and if they are engaged and involved in the process.
That's really cool. That's really cool. It sounds like the word's out a little bit. The communication you've been doing has really helped, and people are starting to get comfortable with that. Is there that was kind of looking back, the trends that you've seen going forward, going out 20, 30 years. What are your hopes for how this dialogue changes and evolves over time?
Without taking sides, because we're not here to get political, but we're in a divisive time, and we certainly can't ignore that. I honestly feel that the way that we have built helps separate us in a way that has created that divide. And when you don't have that downtown, when you don't have that main street where you accidentally rub elbows with people that may not look like you, talk like you, may not earn the same amount as you, you remain in that bubble. What I see is if we can focus on creating great places that allow people to thrive, create these more walkable nodes, even for the folks who do live in a drivable suburban area. If we can provide those opportunities to mix and mingle, I do believe some of these sort of entrenched divisions that we've seen will start to be peeled away. And I think that could be perhaps the greatest benefit when we talk about the triple bottom line on the social end, of creating, a community that has more interaction and more understanding, and how we build our places, and building places for people can play a pivotal role.
That's huge. I love that as kind of a guiding North Star, because I do share that view with you. I do feel as though sometimes we're shuffled into bits of isolation because of the way that certain parts of our cities are structured, and I really do think that what you're describing is a really admirable future that we can work towards, where we are interacting with all sorts of different people, and we are able to find more common ground, because the built environment is just that important to shaping facets of our life and who we interact with and everything like that. So that's really cool. I love that vision for the future. So Vernon, is there anything that we didn't get to discuss today that you'd like to share with our audience?
I just, be involved, right? Engagement's a two-way street. Be open-minded. It doesn't mean that you're going to change your mind or that you have to, but at least have that perspective and focus on the outcomes. I'll close off with, neighborhoods are created because you have neighbors, and focus on being a good neighbor. Focus on welcoming new neighbors and creating places that allow you and your neighbors to thrive. When neighbors do well, neighborhoods do well. And when you build your neighborhood for people, you're going to have a better and healthier community. So get involved.
That's amazing. That's amazing, Brandon. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for everything that you do. And thank you for reminding us to remember and to focus on the people and the neighbors and the outcomes that we want.
Appreciate it. I really thank you for your time.
Awesome. So before we sign off today, as always, we'd love to encourage y'all to go out and check out Dallas Housing Coalition's upcoming events on our website, including the Zoning 101 community talks that we've been discussing, as well as our second annual housing summit that will be on November the 21st. We're all really excited about that. And also the resident housing summit that'll be on November the 22nd. Also, follow our social media for more updates to stay connected for our Housing for All webinar series, and visit our website, dallashousingcoalition.com, to subscribe to our communications and become a member of the coalition today. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in to the 52nd edition of Housing for All webinar, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. Thank you.